am here at Playmakers Repertory Company, or Playmakers, at UNC at Chapel Hill with Zack Fine, who is the Playwright of Bewilderness that opened last night. Congratulations on your opening.
Thanks.
Tell me a little bit about Bewilderness, because I wouldn't be able to kind of sum it up.
It's the story of a writer, an aspiring playwright, trying to write a play about Henry David Thoreau's first book. So Henry David Thoreau went to Walden Pond to write, obviously as we know, Walden, but he actually went there to write another book called A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers. And in our story, a playwright, an aspiring playwright, played by me, is trying to write a play about the process of writing those books.
And I have to say, it's not a serious play.
It is a comedy.
You're making it sound serious,
Yeah.
but it's a little bit on the absurd, ridiculous,
Yes.
smart, but funny.
Yeah, it is a comedy for sure, and its intention certainly is to hopefully bring some joy and laughter to people, while hopefully, saying something about the creative process, and a little bit about loss and grief, a little bit about how we go through change in life and how we let go of people we love.
Have you always been a little bit obsessed with Henry David Thoreau?
Since I'm 19, I took a transcendentalism course in college, and I just fell in love with his writing and transcendentalists and nature writing, and so those books really stayed with me. Nature writing in particular, I just was really drawn to Annie Dillard and Edward Abbey and Thoreau and obviously Emerson, and so something about nature writing stuck with me, and then my theater life took over after college, and then I somehow found a way to marry the two.
And you've said on the Playmakers site that it's kind of an absurd meditation of failure and the process. So
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about the writing process, the playwriting process, kind of how you go from development, page to stage kind of thing. I know you said last night that initially this was inspired by an article you read in the New Yorker, and it was going to be a little bit of a piece about sustainability and about nature. So how do you go from that to what we're seeing this weekend on stage?
Yeah, one of the things that I teach is, and I say this in the play, I teach clown and clowning, and one of the real central tenets of that is experiencing failure. A clown comes out on stage with the intent to try to do something, and usually when they can't do it, that's where the laughter starts to come in for the audience, and that's really the dynamic in a way. But it's the pleasure and joy of failure. It's the pleasure and joy of trying to do something, and maybe a disaster ensues or a fiasco ensues, and that's very much the spirit of the clown. And I found that spirit in Thoreau's writing, and so I definitely was inspired to try to emulate his first book, which he wrote before he wrote Walden, which is a real mishmash of attempts to try to write a book, but it coheres, but barely. And so I not only did I experience that in the writing process, because that was Thoreau's first book and this is my first play, and so I was sort of taking my inspiration from the fact that was he struggled through creating his first book, and I was sort of struggling through my writing the first play. But I love failure. I embrace failure. It's a necessary step along the creative process, always.
Obviously, Henry David Thoreau is a central character in this piece. You're a central character as yourself, as the playwright in this piece.
Yeah.
But Cynthia Thoreau, Henry's mom,
Yeah.
is really kind of this badass woman, played beautifully by Julia Gibson. So can you talk a little bit about her? Because
Yeah.
it was surprising. I mean, we knew we're seeing a play about Henry David Thoreau, but she really kind of turned out to be the surprise heroine of this piece. So talk a little bit about her.
Yeah, she was a real life, did you say badass?
Badass.
Yeah, she was a real life badass. She, Concord, Massachusetts at the time in, the 1840s, was a center for abolitionism. And she was heavily involved in the abolitionist movement as well as the Underground Railroad. And so she did use her home, her boarding house, as a depot to shuttle escaped slaves through to freedom. And but she was a woman who didn't have many educational opportunities, and yet she was deeply learned and self-taught, a rigorous thinker and householder and leader in the community. She was apparently just a very strong, opinionated person who had a huge impact on her children. She just struck me as somebody who needed more of a voice, and also in a way she became an epic character for me, because she became somebody who sort of brought in with her not only her own rage at what was going on in the world, but a sort of collective feminine rage at what it was like to be a woman then, and that was only just my imagination of that. But I put her in a modern vernacular, so.
You did take some creative license.
Oh my gosh, yes. I take a ton of creative license.
With her.
The historical, there are, yes, I don't mean to say that it's a docudrama, but it was inspired by a lot of real stuff. That she just seemed to me a really great woman who had a huge impact on Henry's life, and I tried to draw a connection in the play subtly between her worldviews and the part of Henry David Thoreau that wrote civil disobedience, and that part of the Henry David Thoreau who laid the foundations in a lot of ways for nonviolent protest in this country, so.
And she still brought his laundry and brought him snacks.
That's all true. That's all true. That's all true.
Somewhere I thought I read, and maybe you can confirm this, deny this, that the cabin set is kind of within those similar dimensions.
Yeah, we tried to build to the exact same dimensions.
Was that important? Was that detail important to you as a playwright, to keep that kind of integrity of the cabin?
Yeah, I mean, I was fascinated by, I went and visited Walden Pond as research and spent some time at the cabin, which is a replica now that's there at Walden Pond. It's not the original. So, but the dimensions are, it's cozy. It's cozy, and it's one room, and he was there for 2 years and 2 months living there, and I just found that, to be a potent theatrical image of filling that cabin with a lot of people. That door just keeps opening, and more people come in, and whether those people are part of his imagination or part of his real world, the way that he populated that space, and then ultimately made that a very sort of sacred space for American mythology, that became, he very much is in a line of people who are stoics, or hermits, or people who are religious seekers. He was after a religious experience in a way, through his connection with nature and himself, and so the cabin was important in that sense. Thoreau said, "Surely joy is the condition of life," is one of the things he said, he has come down to us through history as this person who's hidden away from the world, but in fact, in reality, he was a joyous human being who loved the world and loved nature and loved people, and yet the loss in his life, which is at the very center of our play, is real. It was really truly a terrible event for him in his life, and a rupture of his most important relationship, and yet he found such deep joy in the aftermath of that, in his connection to nature. I think that I've also experienced my own grief and loss in my life, and I think you have a couple options in response to those experiences, and one is to close oneself off more from the world, and another is to try to take it as an opportunity to live as fully as possible for the time we have, and to accept that we're mortal, and I think that losing people close to you has an impact to accept the finite nature of life. Of course, we know it as a concept or an idea, but until it comes to you personally, you think, I'm here forever, and you think other people are here forever. And then once you start losing people, you feel the finite nature of life, and I think you have a choice in that, in response to that, which is to embrace your time and embrace the joy of living and the options that we have to be a human being experiencing love, loss, and everything in between, or you close off and live in fear of death the whole time. So I think that Thoreau helped me in many ways understand that life is to be embraced and lived, and it sounds so simple, but it is something that I try to do, and that's and I think it's also just, life is funny, it's a divine comedy.